All right. The stolen generation is something that has impacted the health of Indigenous Australians immensely. It has forced them to be thrown into foster homes where they are sexually, physically, and emotionally abused. So the Australian government was just taking these kids out of their home, putting them in foster homes, and this happened from early 19th century up until late 1960s. However, there is more than just the stolen generation that affected their health. uh, Things such as racism, so not having rights and being discriminated against continuously up until this day is still happening. So back to the stolen generation and being thrown into foster homes. When a child is growing up in a foster home, it actually causes for more delinquent behaviour and increased amounts of emergency visits. Now, these emergency visits can be due to the sexual, physical, and emotional abuse that is going on. Now, with all this abuse going on in the household that they've been raised in, emotional distress is very common to happen. So, 20 to 30% of Aboriginal people aged over 55 have a much higher rate of emotional distress levels than those who are non-Indigenous and were not raised in foster homes. Just shows to prove that living in a foster home can cause all sorts of problems and impacts their health even up until this day. Next is the health needs that needs to be taken for the Indigenous Australians. Schooling accessibility can be two things that can correlate with each other. So only 51% of the population aged between 15 and 17 have actually attended some form of education. Now this carries on with only 40% of high school of Aboriginal people actually attending high school. The reasons for such low rates can be due to low levels of transport, once again back to accessibility. Reasons for this could be cost, time and inconvenience. Seeing as most rural Aboriginal individuals will be living on farmland, they might have to be working on the farm day in, day out to make a living. Next, we have diabetes, which also correlates with exercise levels. Seeing as Indigenous people are 3 times more likely to have some form of diabetes than non-Indigenous Australians, and it is even more prevalent in remote or rural Aboriginals, they need to take care of their lifestyle better. So this includes things as diet and, once again, exercise. So exercise levels for Aboriginals are 61% of Aboriginal Torres Strait Islanders recorded that they were physically inactive. This shows that they're not achieving maximum health benefits that they should be achieving or can be achieving. And the professional care needed is in terms of GPs, nurses, any sort of healthcare individual coming out to rural areas especially and taking care of these people that have high rates of diabetes and have low rates of exercise. So GPs in Australia are actually trained to go out to rural areas in Australia and help close the gap between the health of non-Indigenous and Indigenous Australians. Now, as well as that, in 2012, nurses and Aboriginal health workers went out to the rural areas and experienced the levels of diabetes that were happening in the rural areas. Now, this caused for a better understanding of the disease and what is going on in the rural area where the Aboriginals are living. This helps combat the issue and builds rapport and gives them more interpersonal relationship.
My name is Cody Redden. I'm studying Bachelor of Science with Exercise Science at Western Sydney in Calgary, now. Today we're talking about health experiences of rural and remote ATSI people. ATSI is Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. So experiences are shaped by a lot of different things. So land use or misuse, so having land taken or having sacred sites built on. Having the stolen generation creates a lot of distrust and insecurity in communities and between communities. Living in rural and remote areas, so in rural and remote services are decreased, and that decreases the amount of people who work in the services, which decreases a lot of treatment options available. Having language barriers, so in a lot of rural and remote areas they speak traditional languages, And so having them understand the treatments and being able to consent properly to treatments and treatment plans is a controversial issue. Negative outlook, so government bodies and distrust. Obviously, because of stolen generation and land rights, there's a lot of distrust towards the government. Segregation, so being removed from society creates a lot of psychological issues and makes it hard for people to feel like they're a part of the community and be a part of the community properly. Racism, so not having approval is causes a lot of issue and makes it hard for people to be a part of, feel a part of the community. Cultural differences, so having different ways of life and education, where a lot of traditional education has been lost through art, song and dance, and storytelling, and this creates a lot of issue at sea. Similarities in experiences between rural or remote ATSI and cold, which is culturally and linguistically diverse Chinese. So there's very similar in rural and remote, language barriers, negative outlook, which could be potentially from where they came from, segregation, racism, cultural differences, and education. The differences are moving to Australia, so having the culture and the languages of Australia being quite different, and moving away from family, which creates a feeling of isolation and
Australians tend to have diverse experiences, generally seeming to be a difficult task when accessing health services. Many of them are dealing with everyday stresses from the beginning of commencing migration, which is generally influenced by the lack of awareness as to what services are made available to them. COLD members tend to miss out on general health services due to things such as language difficulties, poverty, racial discrimination, cultural issues, and different cultural understandings of what health is, as well as the unfamiliarity with Western health systems, and the lack of trust they have faced when accessing health services. It is noted that people from COLD backgrounds have a much lower level of access to health care, as their knowledge and understanding of where or how to receive support with health care is minimised. It is also recognised that COLD Australians who do access health services tend to do this through emergency hospitals departments once they have reached a very severe or highly problematic stage in their condition, which in return prolongs their health and decreases quality of life. It's evident that there are both similarities and differences between the health experience of Indigenous Australians and COLD Australians. Similarities shared between both groups are that practical barriers faced to accessing health services. Accessibility may be limited to lower income earners or those living in rural and remote areas, due to the location of the health service centre not being easily accessible or centrally located. This may be compounded further by the cost of accessing services for those living in poverty or in lower income households, which then increases the isolation felt by the Indigenous and COLD Australians. Another similarity faced is a lack of confidence to engage with services or provide personal information related to their health issues in fears that they may not be understood culturally, judged or stereotyped, which can then see them disengage from the service because they do not consider it appropriate for their cultural needs, or they face issues in regards to fears that it may lead to a misdiagnosis. To that, there are many differences between the two groups. It is known that Indigenous Australians do experience much higher levels of illness and premature death than those who are non-Indigenous, including the COLD groups. Indigenous Australians also face social expectations where they have much more of a higher disadvantage in regards to their behavioural and environmental risks. Culturally, they are also discriminated and judged, where their cultural identity feels as though that it has been taken away from them. COLD Australians are more recognised in professional qualifications and experiences. Generally, they tend to face greater language barriers and they tend to also face barriers in regards to their new host countries, trying to familiarise themselves and be comfortable with their new homeland.
So I'm going to explain an intervention which can be applied to the Alawari tribe Aboriginal community, which is located just north of Alice Springs. Due to the lack of empathy coming from the healthcare workers in the healthcare system, Aboriginal individuals struggle to trust and adapt to new interventions which are introduced. Candela and Barnett explain that healthcare workers should be educated in the past experiences of Aboriginals and their particular region in order to connect and empathise with their clients. In this way, clients will be more inclined to adapt to the intervention which is provided. Healthcare workers should be educated in cultural background and language for a specific region they are located at. This will improve communication between client and patient, and the patient will trust the healthcare worker more. Aboriginal communities are often in remote areas from healthcare services, fresh food and water. A journey plan will be put into place for communities to have the quickest route to their healthcare services and food. Additionally, there will be dedicated transport vehicle which will be used in such a circumstance. Ferguson suggests that there should be a re-evaluation of food and beverages in remote areas. This can be more affordable to Aboriginal communities all around Australia, and they can have fresh fruit and vegetables more often. Mental health is also a major burden for Aboriginal communities. With a high relapse rate in mental illness, healthcare workers should be educated on mental health with one-on-one counselling sessions available for all individuals, regardless of their health status. Literacy and numeracy skills are very poor in Aboriginal communities, with less than 50% of Aboriginal individuals still studying at the age of 17. So there'll be programs held in each school and community in order to increase academic performance and have these students go on into university. And lastly, recruitment. Healthcare workers in remote areas need to be increased due to the lack of remote stuff out there. There's not much. And lastly, recruitment. Healthcare workers in remote areas need to be increased. According to Gwynn and Lincoln, there is insufficient supply of healthcare workers being located in remote areas, which needs to be addressed urgently. This will improve client-to-patient ratio in remote Aboriginal communities, which will in turn improve the rate at which individuals are seen and cared for by the healthcare workers.
All right, and to finish off, we'll be discussing the intervention programs and discussing whether or not they will benefit the health outcomes of Indigenous Aboriginals. So firstly, we'll talk about interpersonal relationships. Now, interpersonal relationships between any two people or any group immediately sets the other person at ease. For the other person to understand what they've been through, to be able to communicate with them properly will help them feel more at ease and make the whole experience more comfortable for them, therefore benefiting their health outcomes and improving their quality of life. That's why we'll be looking at the holistic view. So looking at health as a holistic view, as talking about mental, physical, social, and all the determinants that are affecting their health. Looking at it holistically helps combat the issues that Indigenous people are facing day in, day out, and therefore improving their health. Once again, going back to those interpersonal relationships, if the people that are trying to help them can input this holistic health, then they will help improve their quality of life. Then moving on to education. So the education programs, such as early education, helps to promote less geographical disadvantages. So by starting early education as an Aboriginal living in rural Australia, it can help to get out of that area before it's too late and begin a new life in a more acceptable and better environment to grow up in. This includes the Alawari rural area in Alice Springs. Also, in the area of Alariri, having the availability of fresh foods will actually promote the better health for the individuals, therefore improving their quality of life.